So what we know about Ayodhya, Ram, is that he was born in Ayodhya. How do you determine the spot? What the two judges have said, that this is where Ram was born. Agarwal's judgment is a complete nonsense. It is a religious commentary and not a legal judgment at all, which is the dissenting judgment. But even the other judge says that Ram was born here. Now, if you are saying that Ram was born here, it is the Hindutva judgment for the simple reason that the entire politics of the 80s and 90s was built upon this single question, that this is the sthan of the Ram's Janam. Therefore, it is Ram Janma Bhumi. This spot where the masjid is. So the BJP, when it was in a not nasty mood, said you shift the mosque. When it was in a, which is very rare that it is not in a nasty mood. When it is not a nasty mood, when it wants to negotiate with you, the negotiation is used for deception. And I am very seriously meaning that. They have always used negotiations, they have always used dialogue to deceive. Not me, not him, who will, Satya was talking of reconciliation. They have not, we are ordinary people, they have deceived the Indian state. The Hindutva forces in front of Supreme Court gave a promise about the protection of the Babri Masjid, that the structure will not be brought down. And within 3 days of that, the structure was brought down. How do you negotiate with a party that gives an assurance to the highest court in the country and act completely contrary to that? So for me, this is a completely bogus thing that you negotiate and resolve the issue. You can't negotiate with people who have historically always deceived negotiations. Dialogue. This is something which is, I think, I'll continue to argue on that, because this is a Hindutva judgment. If you concede that Ram was born there, then you are also conceding the politics behind that. The politics behind that this is the place where Ram was born, is the politics on the basis of which Hindutva built itself. The politics, in short, was centered around two things. This was a minor issue, smaller issue. The place of birth of Ram, and therefore the mandir should come up there. But there was a larger issue. The larger issue was they continuously taught Hindu Rashtra. And when they were charged with communalizing Indian politics, theocratizing Indian politics, their argument was there is nothing more secular than Hindu Rashtra. Now this is what I am talking of as something what you call theoretical deception. You want a Hindu Rashtra, you want a state based on the principles of a certain religion, you want the state to have the character of a certain religion, and then you say it is secular politics. So the politics of it was very simple, that you want to create a political atmosphere, you want to create a kind of a political culture within which the whole idea of the Hindu Rashtra not only thrives but becomes a legitimate concern with the great majority of the Indian people. It is to the good of the Indian democracy, it is to the good of the common sense of the majority of Indian people that never became a hegemonic position in Indian society as they had hoped to. It did create a frenzy, but at the best of the times for Hindutva, the frenzy was confined to only about 20%, 25% of the Hindu population, never more than that. Overwhelming the Hindu community stayed out of it. So I think the judgment's dangerous thing is it is endorsing, it is legitimizing and endorsing that particular politics that the Hindutva forces played in this country in the whole of 80s and 90s. It is that politics after the 1947 killing of the Muslims and the Hindus by Muslims and the Hindus. Both killed each other. After that, it is again my argument, India did not have Hindu-Muslim killings. That is complete nonsense. All India had after 1947 was communal Hindu forces killing Muslims. That is the history of what you call communal, what people call rioting. I don't call it rioting, I call it what you call the history of the massacre, communal massacre. It reached its peak in Gujarat. but it has always had the character. You look at any riot, any police report, any commission, 90% of the people who died, 95% of the property which was looted and destroyed, burned, whatever, the shops which were plundered are all Muslim shops. I'm not an ardent Muslim, and I have no fear of saying that this is what happened in India. A lot of Muslims will feel defensive to say that. I don't feel defensive because I talk like a citizen of India. This is the fact of what you call the post-47 history of communal sectarian violence. And if you look at it, in the entire history of that violence, 1962 Jabalpur riots, where 1,000 people got killed, the 1987 the anti-caste, lower caste struggle got converted into a communal rioting. Nearly 900 people, according to police report, died in Gujarat. In all of these, if you look at the police reports and if you look at what you call the commission report which were set up by the government, 90% and more people who died and 95% of the property destroyed was all Muslim property. How do you call it a riot? What is a riot? When two people fight each other. When 10 here, 12 there, 14 here, 9 there are the killings or the lootings. But if it is so one-sided, how do you call it a riot? Now, I think this is the politics which was the politics of the Ram Mandir. That is, in other words, quite apart from the question of physical insecurity, the politics of the Hindutva was a politics of what you call creating something called the other in India. Creating a community, a people in India who live in India but who are not a part of India. The question was again and again raised by the Hindutva forces. Who belongs to India? Now, constitutionally, by secularism, anybody who's living in India, who's a citizen of India, belongs to India. A secular definition of a citizenship is very simple. A citizen is one who has entrenched rights. Plus, there is no plus and minus. Apart from having entrenched rights, I don't have to be a Muslim or a Hindu to be a citizen. A secular definition of a citizen has no plus to it or no minus to it. It is simply a person who enjoys entrenched rights guaranteed by the Constitution. That he cannot be alienated of that right so long as he is a citizen. Unless I become a criminal, unless I become a bankrupt, unless I become charged with proven treason to the country, I cannot be what you call, my rights cannot be alienated. So a Muslim is a citizen of this country. Now, given this particular fact, the Hindutva politics was to create another in the society who lives on the territory of India but who doesn't belong to India. His allegiances are outside of India. They ask the ridiculous kind of a question. Okay, your Makkah is outside India. So, okay, what happens to an NRI Muslim Hindu who lives in America and he thinks that Banaras is my sacred place? Or Kashi is my sacred place? Or Ujjain is my sacred place? Or whatever else? The American government or the British government can't turn around, or a British citizen can't turn around and say, your holy place is in India. That is complete nonsense. In other words, they generated a discursive world within Indian politics where they tried to show that here in India there is a set of people who are not only not citizens but they are hostile aliens. The effort of Hindutva to create a hostile alien within India. This hostile alien is much more a threat to India than any external threat. Therefore, the internal alien, I once asked while interviewing a VHP leader, when you say they want to create a Pakistan in India, I said the Muslims are so scattered He was an engineer by profession, an educated man, spoke English very well, and I spent a long time recording an interview. So I asked him, Muslims are so scattered, barring Jammu and Kashmir, barring a district in Bengal, Murshidabad or Malda where there are 45%, Murshidabad where there are 54%, barring a district or so, they are so small minorities, scattered 10% here, 8% there, 15% there, 2% there, like that. So how can a population scattered like that create a Pakistan in India? The answer was very interesting. He said, we are not fools. We don't mean territorial separation. We mean that Muslims want to create so many ideological Pakistans in India. That is, each Muslim enclave, whatever be its size, is within India an ideological Pakistan. Now, here is a politics not simply of creating the other in Indian society, but an other which is a hostile alien which works against the country. Now, this is the politics of the Hindutva. Very interesting. I don't want to go into it. The ideological foundation of what Hindutva represents is the very famous book which was written in 1923-1924 by a person called Savarkar. The book is called Hindutva. He is the only ideologue that Hindutva movement has ever produced. Golwalkar's book, Bunch of Thought, is a complete idiotic set of writing. You see a man without intelligence. You see a man without critical faculty. You see a man bereft of what you call any grey matter in his head. This was what Mr. Golwalkar was. Here was a man who was rigorous in his reasoning, who was a thinking mind, Savarkar. And he produced a small book which is only about 84 pages in its original edition. But it's a powerful book. In any case,